Disasters cost lives, they destroy houses, they destroy livelihoods, they destroy people's belongings, and they're on the increase. All the indicators we have are that the impact of disasters on society is continuing to get worse. Something has to be done, not just to be able to respond to the disaster, but actually to do things that can actually reduce, prevent those disasters from occurring in the first place.
Disaster risk reduction is the name given to these activities. Activities aimed at reducing both people's vulnerability to and the impacts of natural hazards. Whilst DRR should always be context-specific, experience gathered from around the world shows that successful projects are based on 6 common principles, which are detailed in this film. Disasters are not simply the result of unavoidable natural hazards like hurricanes or earthquakes. The roots of these disasters lie in people's vulnerability, vulnerabilities which will have built up over many years.
Many governments and many communities have become more aware. The problem is that at the same time there has been also an increase in the vulnerabilities, and we now have a larger population, many people still living in the wrong places, not paying attention to the risks that are involved.
We need to address these vulnerabilities and identify how power and socio-economic conditions influence people's abilities to cope. Tajikistan is a mountainous country, extremely prone to earthquakes and mudslides. These can often devastate whole communities.
I lost everything, everyone. Everything is gone. I don't know what to do. I can't get any help. Is it my fault? Is it something I did that made the mudslide come and destroy everything? Everything is so bad. I don't know what to do.
A disaster such as this can be reduced or even avoided if properly understood. Following independence from the Soviet Union and a civil war, there has been an increase in people's vulnerability, much of which is man-made. Over half the population now live below the poverty line and live in unsafe locations. Services for social protection have declined. Fuel has become more scarce and expensive. Many communities have resorted to clearing the hillsides of trees just to provide enough fuel for cooking and to keep warm. Now, when there are heavy rains, there are no trees to absorb the water or hold the soil in place. And as a result, lethal mudslides and flash floods are commonplace.
The old school was in such a bad place, it could have been destroyed at any time, and eventually it was.
This is our homeland. It's the only place we want to live. So the only way is to prepare for such disasters. There is some training going on, but we need to do more in terms of how to react, how to organize early warning systems, and be more responsive.
Responding when mudslides happen is not enough. Prior education can help communities like these to understand all the contributing risk factors and can help them to gain the knowledge and resources they need in order to address them. They have rebuilt the school in a safer location. They are replanting trees and using more energy-efficient stoves. In addition, they have also established a disaster committee who are trained in early warning and search and rescue. All these measures are helping to reduce their vulnerability to future disasters. Disasters hit the world's poorest communities, and although government agencies and charities often respond with emergency aid, it is really important to involve communities in the decisions and actions which will protect them during disasters and also address the root causes discussed in Chapter 1.
It's important to realize that communities have inherent capacity to cope. In many instances, communities have had to cope with droughts for many generations. They've had to cope with floods for many generations. And so they have a lot of indigenous knowledge it's important that we don't ignore that indigenous knowledge.
In Malawi, local people have their own way of anticipating droughts and have ways of coping when the worst happens.
We observe the behavior of birds, direction of the wind or flowering of mango trees, and we can tell if the rains will come or not.
Drought and in turn hunger brings chaos in everyone's life. We sell bicycles, radios and livestock at very low prices just to buy food so we can survive.
However, solutions like this can increase poverty and do not reduce vulnerability to future disasters. Community days like this one in Sanje, Malawi, include educational drama and musical performances about DRR. The aim is to bring the community together to discuss various issues. Here, the local government official has accepted an invitation from the community to discuss DRR. The community can then make informed choices about how they can reduce disaster risks.
They are aware of the different risks that they are facing, like drought, and we are looking at how we can utilize existing opportunities. For communities that are in places where there is no water sources, we are trying to see how they could use other water sources, maybe drilling a borehole for them, for small-scale irrigation powered by solar panels, solar energy, and then the same water also they can use, for drinking, and that reduces, their vulnerability to diseases like cholera.
It is important to remember that participation is more than just consulting people. It should engage people in making decisions in key areas which affect their lives.
We've learned about the risk of droughts, and as a result we've decided to buy goats and guinea fowl. We've also built grain banks. This way we'll be more resilient to droughts.
This process enables local knowledge to be utilized and for community members to decide what action they can take and what support they need from the government and NGOs.
Government are responsible, but also the community themselves are responsible. They're the ones that feel the impact. And so they have a big role to play in that, they can be mobilized into committees and volunteers, because when a hazard impacts, they are the first people to respond.
Disasters impact differently on different members of a community. Women and children are often identified as the most vulnerable in society, but this is not the same in all cases, and it is important to recognize that other factors, such as old age, physical and mental ability, ethnic background, socio-economic circumstances, will also have an effect on how people are impacted. To avoid the exclusion of important needs, these differences must be recognized and addressed.
In any disaster emergency program, how do we know the most vulnerable are included? How do we know that the most vulnerable are participating in those decisions? How do we know when we measure risk reduction, we are keeping in mind the most vulnerable in the community? So that means we need to understand the social as well as the political phenomena that is in operation in that society.
In recent floods in Bihar in northern India, there was reported discrimination against low-caste Dalits by neighboring villages and by the government.
There is a tendency, if you go by the hierarchy of the caste system, the most vulnerable are not counted in. What they deserve is decided by these cultural perceptions and values.
Members of the Dalit community were excluded from government food relief distributions and faced physical violence when trying to access safety platforms and clean water sources, which were on land owned by higher castes. In response, a local human rights NGO has been working with the community to bring this problem to the attention of governments, media, and the general public, and to help the Dalits lobby for better conditions. Everyone was given a chance to input into discussions about reconstruction and disaster risk reduction. Here, the women from the village are voicing their concerns. As a result of this consultation, separate safety platforms and raised water pumps were built for the Dalits to ensure they can seek refuge during future floods without fear of recriminations. The Dalit community currently have no land rights and live in areas prone to river erosion. The local NGOs encourage the community to help to design secure yet portable houses. This way, they can dismantle and carry the houses with them if they need to move. Disasters can present opportunities to promote the policies and behavioral changes needed to reduce risks. Effective DRR must be inclusive. This can only be done by fully engaging with all members of the community. Men, women, the elderly and disabled, the more economically vulnerable, and of course, children. We have seen that disasters are a combination of hazards and vulnerabilities, such as unsafe conditions, dynamic pressures, and economic and political conditions. Therefore, the solutions needed will be multifaceted, requiring numerous different skills and resources and organizations to work together. Central America is plagued by numerous disasters every year, ranging from small localized floods to large-scale hurricanes, such as Hurricane Mitch, which devastated the region in 1998. Disasters such as these exacerbate poverty by destroying houses, crops and assets and placing lives at risk.
Last year was a record year for rainfall in Central America. In 70 years, there hasn't been so much rain, so much water. There were 14 strong hurricanes that affected the whole of Central America.
The river grows very rapidly, and there's a risk for the kids when they go to school. Because the school is on the other side of the river, we worry on this side because they might get washed away.
Individual actions taken by community groups, NGOs, or government are not sufficient to tackle these persistent and frequent problems. So a more collaborative approach is required. This should involve communities, NGOs and the government working together to make optimum use of available resources and skills.
Strategic partnerships have a lot of advantages because DRR means solving a variety of problems. So it's good to create alliances and partnerships between different groups. That'll bring them different capacities and expertise. And between them all, we solve the problem.
Here in Grenada, Nicaragua, such a project has brought together different groups and communities to help them to reduce their vulnerability to disasters.
Tenemos un organigrama donde, ¿verdad?, el alcalde es el responsable, ¿verdad?, es el jefe de la defensa civil.
There is a structure for emergency relief, and at the head of it is the mayor. He links to central government. Then there are the different bodies of the government and the NGOs. And among all of them, they form a civil defence movement. This can respond to the emergencies.
The community organized disaster committees, and the local government arranged for the Civil Defense Authority to come and train them. The community groups drew maps of their villages to identify escape routes and places of safety. An NGO helped to raise funds from an international donor so that communities could carry out mitigation work, which they had identified, such as the bridge being built here. Projects like these are only possible because of the strategic partnerships between communities, governments, technical specialists, and NGOs.
What we have to do is find ways that we can actually bring those NGOs, civil society organisations, national NGOs, national, international, local, bring them together in coherent ways. And if we can do that, then possibly we can get ahead of the curve a bit and really start to be proactive and not just reactive to these constant crises that we're facing.
In the past, the focus of a lot of work has been solely treating the symptoms and saving lives after a disaster. For example, distributing emergency food aid after drought-related famines in areas of Africa. This is often insufficient and short-term, and many people end up selling off assets or leaving their homelands in search of food and work in order to survive. This sets up a vicious cycle of vulnerability, of disaster, loss of livelihood, and increasing poverty.
20 years ago, the drought was really severe and it affected people's lives, as we did not have the dam at the time. We did not have water and crops, so many people left the area and families were separated.
It is very important to understand this link between disasters, risks, and livelihoods. Disasters and shocks can wipe out livelihoods and assets and increase people's poverty. Alternatively, livelihoods which are designed to be more resilient to disaster risk can help people resist and recover more quickly from hazards and shocks. This is where DRR is important.
The developing countries or poor countries, most of them are agri-based. There's rural farmers where they depend a lot on rain-fed agriculture, for example. And we need a livelihood base, a sustainable livelihood base to enable people to adopt, behaviors that prevent disasters from happening.
I think that nowadays we do not have enough water, as rainfall is getting less and less each year, and the rainy season is getting shorter and shorter. It does not rain the way it used to when we're young, and the wells are drying up.
So a vulnerable person is akin to somebody sitting at the edge of a cliff, where any slight push will see him fall over. We need to move that person from the edge of the cliff to more safer ground.
The NGO helped us by building the dam so that water is kept in a particular place. And they have helped us to build canals which helps water flow to our land.
Projects like this one in Burkina Faso are helping communities identify the risks to their livelihoods and what protection or adaptive techniques are necessary. Traditional livelihoods need to adjust and adapt to these changes. Farmers have re-established traditional techniques for water and soil conservation, such as planting trees, building demi-lunes to trap water, seen here. By doing this, they are reclaiming land from desertification.
A few weeks before the rain comes, we build these walls with earth to retain the water when it rains.
They are reducing their over-reliance on rainfall and increasing production and income, even in times of less favorable weather.
In 2005, there was a severe drought, but we were not affected as we had a lot of water in our dam, so our activities were not that disrupted. In the rainy season, we plant rice and then vegetables in the dry season, so we harvest twice and don't suffer from famine.
Here, in an area of El Salvador prone to hurricanes, storm surges and flooding, one community has come up with a holistic solution, which protects the environment, provides a good livelihood income, and also protects them from disasters.
We have built this flood wall from tires. It prevents the sea coming into our community. Here we have mangroves and other types of trees. The fish and crabs breed here. They feed on the leaves that fall into the water. Many families benefit from catching and eating these fish, so for us replanting and protecting the mangroves has been vital.
Entonces los punches que le llamamos nosotros, ellos de eso se alimentan, las conchas, y es un sustento de que muchas familias se benefician de eso. Por eso es bien vital la reforestación de mangle acá en nuestra comunidad.
They are now making their own crab cages and catching fish to sell in the nearby restaurant. From the money they have made, they have been able to construct a bridge to allow the children to get to school safely when it floods. For DRR to be effective, it needs to have a strong livelihood base. This requires a combination of activities aimed at protecting the physical capital, such as houses and belongings, natural capital, such as land and the environment, and enhancing the financial capital through more resilient income generation. Successful disaster risk reduction not only tackles current problems, but also needs to take into account long-term sustainability and environmental protection concerns to reduce future risk. The tsunami disaster, which devastated parts of South and Southeast Asia in 2005, exposed many of people's vulnerabilities to disasters, including unsafe infrastructure, economic and environmental pressures, and lack of appropriate government development policies.
Most of the natural barriers had been damaged during last about 50 years. The mangroves, the sand dunes were removed for development purposes, particularly for hotel industry development.
This was evident across the region. In Sri Lanka, one of the countries hardest hit by the tsunami, natural defenses had been cleared for short-term economic gains. This left the coastline more susceptible to the forces of tsunamis and storm surges. Issues like this must be redressed during reconstruction and ongoing development, so that both current and future generations are more resilient to disaster.
When the tsunami struck, we had the chance to relook at some of the problems that we had been facing. What happened was, whatever we had done wrong, we had the chance to redo it. And I believe that in certain sections of the coast, we have a chance to rebuild them in a manner that we could look at sustainable development. So in reality, I think that the tsunami, though it was a devastating experience, we did have an opportunity within it.
After the tsunami, this area was devastated, and so these children are participating in an environmental campaign where they're planting trees to prevent further environmental disasters. By doing that, we're hoping to encourage the children to think environmentally and educate them further about their importance.
Educating the younger generation about disasters is key to developing a culture of risk prevention, which will last well into the future. Disasters are a complex mix of natural hazards and human activity. So, to reduce disaster risks, we need to understand what types of hazard affect people, and then also the different levels of vulnerability which different groups of people have to these hazards. This vulnerability is determined by power and socio-economic systems as much as exposure to risk. But it is also important to note that everyone has knowledge and skills which can contribute to reducing disaster risk. Bearing in mind the 6 principles shown in this film can help to ensure that DRR work provides the best solutions for each particular context, saving lives and protecting development gains for future generations.